Well, in the last 2 days, we have dealt with the different aspects of Sri Krishna. Among them, we saw first Sri Krishna as the great statesman, the expert in political science, and also, if Sri Aurobindo claimed himself to be a politician and a poet, I think Krishna too was one such, having given us his great poetic work, the Bhagavad Gita. Then we have seen his aspect as the avatar, and then what he gives to Arjuna and to the age. We have also covered a bit the historical Krishna, because many scholars debate on that. Although Sri Aurobindo confirms the historicity of Sri Krishna, he would tell us for the purposes of sadhana and spirituality, all these external biographical details are secondary, because we need to concentrate on the internal divinity, that is the immanent Sri Krishna. Then we have seen the other aspect of Sri Krishna being the leader and guide of many persons in the Mahabharata. He has really given strength, solace, and he has solved many a problem of many characters and personalities in the Mahabharata. And we are going to now take up the last but one para of this chapter, the Divine Teacher. That's where we had stopped yesterday in our reading. Thus the figure of Krishna becomes, as it were, the symbol of the divine dealings with humanity. Through our egoism and ignorance, we are moved, thinking that we are the doers of the work, wanting of ourselves as the real causes of the result, and that which moves us we see only occasionally as some vague or even some human and earthly fountain of knowledge, aspiration, force, some principle or light or power which we acknowledge and adore without knowing what it is, until the occasion arises that forces us to stand arrested before the veil. So this is the cosmic and the universal aspect of Sri Krishna, that he is the divine hidden in humanity, not only guiding the characters and the personalities in the Mahabharata, but also on the cosmic level, he deals with all our human actions and activities. Although we, in our ignorance, we think that we are the doers, and we feel that we have brought out certain results in the world. Not only we feel, but we claim and we are proud of, and we show them off. Look what I have done. This is my achievement. So all the while we take the credit of the work upon ourselves. But the truth is that it is He who works in us even through our egoism, through our limitations, through our ignorance. He is taking us forward through all the means possible and available at the present state of an individual's consciousness. So the individual also, at certain times, when he is in a crisis perhaps, that he sees some vague or even some human and earthly fountain of knowledge, it is only at that time we kind of turn to the divine and say, hey, maybe it is God who has helped me. But otherwise, in normal circumstances, we always say it is I who am doing the work, and I am the person who is achieving this and that. Well, only fortunate are those who can realize, who can constantly remember, and most important, who can constantly be grateful to the divine that it is He who is doing the things through us and in us. Because remembrance must be attached with gratitude. Just to remember and say, yes, the God who has done it is not sufficient. So when the mother also tells us remember and offer, there is in the parenthesis the idea that when you remember, express your gratitude. So it is in the expression of our gratitude to the divine that our intimacy with the divine grows. And the gratitude is not just to say, thank you, the Mother, thank you, Sri Krishna, thank you, God. The gratitude is not a lip service. It has got to be, as it is said in Sanskrit, nata, to bow down our head, our being. When we say the Shashtanga Namaskar, you may do it or not with the physical, that the Shashtanga Namaskar is a physical expression of the surrender. But even psychologically, you must have, each time you say, Ma, thank you. So the thank you is the whole being responding with that gratitude. And imagine if each time I remember the Mother and say, Ma, thank you, with that kind of a total integral self-offering, what more do you require in sadhana? There is no other greater practice than this. That's why the mantra that the Mother and Sri Aurobindo have given us, and the mantra Sri Krishna has given us, where it says, O Arjuna, remember me and fight, is the same mantra. It's the same solution. So here, the Lord sometimes awakens us. Out of His grace we recollect and we remember and we acknowledge that it is Lord Krishna who is doing the works. So that is supposedly, I suppose, the difference between ignorance and knowledge. The more you realize that I am not the doer, I am only an instrument. In the beginning, it could be a psychological repetition of this, saying, I am not the doer, I am only the instrument, I am not the doer, I am only an instrument. But this psychological repetition, if you do it 50 times a day, 100 times a day, 200 times a day, then you really become the instrument. Because this attitude that you take up will ultimately sink so deep into your being that the ego is kind of arrested and you begin to say, Lord, it's Thou who art doing the works. And then there comes a beautiful attitude, a beautiful gratitude, saying, look, the Lord has made me an instrument, has taken me as an instrument. And me, who is this me, with all the incapacities and the weaknesses and the ignorance and all that? I'm nowhere perfect. Am I even worthy of being considered an instrument? And yet look at the grace of the Divine, that He has taken me and doing the work. So these are the psychological steps in our sadhana where we get the intimacy with the Divine. And this word intimacy is what we are going to develop in the next chapter, because that is one of the most important relations with the Divine. We will talk it at length in the third chapter. So this is where Sri Aurobindo is telling us some principle of light we recognize, or power which we acknowledge and adore without knowing what it is, until the occasion arises that forces us to stand arrested before the veil. So when we are in a big calamity, then we say, God, You alone are my solution and my strength. In fact, some of you students of English literature might have read a poem called The Hound of Heaven by Thomson, if I am not too wrong, wherein we see God chasing the individual. And the individual is running away from God, hiding from God. He goes into work, he goes into love, he gets into relation, he gets into business, he gets into nature, he gets everywhere. What are these? Is all the question saying, I am the doer, I am the person, why do I need God? But then he constantly hears the footfalls of the Divine chasing. It's a beautiful poem, one of the most remarkable poems which I read 35 years back, and it's still very alive. But that was a true spiritual experience of how the Divine is constantly with us, but we are constantly rejecting and blocking Him, because my ego says it's me who is doing the things. But ultimately, the Francis Thompson also comes to this end. He says, alas, he stops. Then he says, I understand, I am nothing. It is He who has been doing the things from behind the veil. And then he says, I felt the blessings of His outstretched hand. Then he says, I became naked in front of the divine, took away all my covers, all the obstructions of the ego, of the self. Then he says, I lay down naked in front of the divine, and then I felt the outstretched hand of the divine. I mean, it's an extraordinary poem, and a spiritual one at that. You can see when you read the poem, Hound of Heaven, if you do come across that, please do read it. So this is exactly the Gita which is telling us, wherein the first stage is I am the doer, second stage is I am the instrument. But in the doer also, we are all doers. Let's not consider ourselves immediately I am an instrument. That's again a false ego. So this is where the sincerity comes in. Many people, the moment you start working a little bit, you say, oh, I am the instrument of the mother. It's a very dangerous claim. Let's be honest and say, Ma, I am the doer. Because I still have the ego. I am so and so, I am doing. But if this doer also, if we can remember and offer, then that would be a perfect balance, I suppose. Instead of having too tall a claim of the instrument and being a doer who has no memory and gratitude and remembrance of the mother, we are somewhere in between. We have all our limited nature, our ambition and our ego and all that. But if we can just say, Ma, it's for you, then slowly we may progress. And who knows, I do not deny some of you might have reached the stage where you could in all honesty and sincerity consider yourself instrument. That goes unsaid. However, that is the second level of the instrument. And then the third level, there are three stages of yoga in the Gita. The doer, the instrument, and then you feel the doer, the instrument are both undertaken by somebody else. So that means the work, the instrumentation, everything is taken by him. He alone is. So that is the most extraordinary stage, the highest stage of identification with the divine. So here what we see, Sri Aurobindo is telling us that Sri Krishna is constantly, continuously taking us through these steps. So in a way we see, as we have seen many a time in the synthesis of yoga too, it's really the divine who does the yoga. Even all these claims, I am doing Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga, I am doing Sri Krishna's Gita yoga, all that is fallacy. I mean, it is a psychological help to begin with, obviously, because even in ignorance, we are given a support saying, hey, I am doing Sri Aurobindo's yoga, and then many people in the West have this normal sentence, I am into yoga for the past 15 years. I have taken up Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga for the past 5 years. So one feels it is a matter of time period when you have taken up yoga, but all that is a fallacy. It is in fact he has awakened you, and it is he who does the yoga. So that is why yesterday we said the avatar is the Lord of yoga. So Sri Aurobindo and the mother too are the Lord of yoga, because it's they who do the yoga. And the fruit of their yoga we enjoy. In our ignorance we enjoy. So that's why the avatar is the greatest yogi. Because he does the yoga for the yuga itself. The whole Dwapara, whole Kali Yuga, whole Satya Yuga enjoys the fruits of the yoga of that avatar. That's why he is the master of yoga, or what we can say, the Lord of yoga. Now, having said that about Sri Krishna, very interestingly, Sri Aurobindo comes back to the same sentence, to the same idea with which he had started this chapter. That is, and the action in which this divine figure moves is the whole wide action of man in life. Not merely the inner life, but all this obscure course of the world, which we can judge only by the twilight of the human reason, as it opens up dimly before our uncertain advance the little span in front. So this is the question of the action, which in the very next sentence he would say, this is the distinguishing feature of the Gita, that it is the culmination of such an action which gives rise to its teaching and assigns that prominence and bold relief to the gospel of works which it enunciates with an emphasis and force we do not find in other Indian scriptures. You see, this is what we had begun with, the same idea. The peculiarity of the Gita among the great religious books of the world is that it does not stand apart as a work by itself. And then down the line he would say, it is given as an episode in an epic history of nations and their wars and men and their deeds, and arises out of a critical moment in the soul of one of its leading personages. So this is what Sri Aurobindo is now generalizing, that as the Lord, the divine Sri Krishna, works behind all our works, all our thoughts, all our emotions, each human being is kind of a representative Arjuna. We are all taken forward by the divine. So which we realize much later in our life, because he says, in the twilight of the human reason, as it opens up dimly before our uncertain advance, the little span in front, when we have opened up within on reason, on the level of mind, we begin to see who has been the real doer. Now this is the distinguishing feature of the Gita, that it is the culmination of such an action. You see, the Mahabharata also we have seen, it is the Lord who is building up. The whole story of Mahabharata is a wonderful example of how the divine works through everybody. Be it Duryodhana, be it Dhritarashtra, be it Bhishma, be it Drona, be it Arjuna, be it Nakula, be it Yudhishthira. He is the one on both sides. He is not just behind Pandavas. In fact, if you remember during the case of the Alipur jail case, Sri Aurobindo tells about his own comrades in the cell, in the jail, that they have come to do this work. You see, at a particular time, the divine brings such people. And then again it is said that the mother explains in some context that it is Sri Krishna who works even from the opposition. Maybe in the Britishers also it's the same Krishna who works. So it's not Lord is not partial to Indians and non-Indians. He works through everyone. So Mahabharata is a wonderful poem, scripture, whatever you want to call that, wherein we see life taken on a miniature scale. Every personality that we have in life is reflected in Mahabharata. Good, bad, strength, lover, this, everything. So it's a miniature world. And there we see the poet telling us how Sri Krishna is working through everybody to come to a culmination of a particular action. That is where, Kurukshetra is that spot where there's a convergence of all these world forces, good and bad. Sri Krishna acts at that moment. When there is a concentration, a focus of forces, that is the moment when Sri Krishna acts upon and brings his new knowledge, brings his new consciousness. Because then everyone can receive at one go. So Gita is given at an extraordinarily wonderful moment when there is a gathering of the forces of the world. So Kurukshetra represents that focus, the centralization of the forces. And so Sri Aurobindo is telling us that is why the incident, the action, the episode is so important. So it is the culmination of such an action which gives rise to its teachings and assigns that prominence and bold relief to the gospel of works which is not found in any other scripture in India. Not only in the Gita, but in other passages of the Mahabharata, we meet with Krishna declaring emphatically the necessity of action. But it is here that he reveals his secret and the divinity behind our works. Well, all along, all of us know a bit of Mahabharata, we see nowhere Sri Krishna advises anyone to withdraw from life, take to an asceticism, take to this kind of, life away from the normal life. He makes Pandavas go through this normal life, its pitfalls, its difficulties, antagonisms, wars, crimes, jealousies, all that, because it's part of life. He said, this is the life you have to face. And through this, if you come out successfully, you are the fitting persons, if I can say, who can receive the new consciousness. So you see, it is not, Duryodhana also goes through life. Arjuna and Yudhishthira also go through life. But who received the new light? We have to see that. Is it Duryodhana? Is it Yudhishthira? Or is it Arjuna? We have three wonderful samples to select from. And we will see in the next chapter who is selected and why is he selected. What are his qualifications for being selected by the divine to receive the new message and the new consciousness. So, that's why he ends this para saying, it is here that he reveals his secret and divinity behind our works. So the whole of the Gita is one of the most pragmatic scriptures, and why we will see in the next chapter, is extremely pragmatic, and there is hardly anything to do with a kind of an advice. You see, the question and answer session, etc., that's a wonderful way the knowledge has been given. Well, the last para of this chapter 1 and chapter 2, the symbolic companionship of Arjuna and Krishna, the human and the divine soul, is expressed elsewhere in Indian thought in the heavenward journey of Indra and Kutsa, seated in one chariot, in the figure of the two birds upon one tree in the Upanishads, in the twin figures of Nara and Narayana, the seers who do tapasya together for the knowledge. But in all three, it is the idea of the divine knowledge in which, as the Gita says, all action culminates that is in view. But here it is instead the action which leads to that knowledge and in which the divine knower figures himself. So this is interesting to see the difference between our own Gita and the other stories. You see, we have always said that Arjuna and Sri Krishna represent this Naranarayana. But it says there is a difference. Because the other stories of Indra and Kutsa, Naranarayana, and the two birds, the famous two birds sitting on two branches, which we see in the Upanishads, he said they're all examples of the idea of the divine knowledge in which all action culminates. So that means the other examples are telling us that if you go through knowledge, you come to that level where all action ceases. You don't have to be in this world, you can be away from it, you realize that knowledge, Brahman, where all action ceases, all birth ceases. There's no question of rebirth and all that. But Gita is just the opposite. He would say here it is instead the action which leads to that knowledge and in which the divine knower figures himself. So Gita is that wonderful way, in fact, very, very, and as I think is most relevant to the present times, which I said before also. Because this is the time, the yuga, the period of work. We are all workaholics. So in this work, or through this work, how to get the divine. There's no emphasis on meditation, there's no emphasis on bhakti, the emphasis is on the work level. So he says, through the work it leads us to knowledge. It's not knowledge which ends in action, which really ends all action, but it's here action which ends in knowledge. And not only when you get the knowledge, you get the great divine who is behind all this knowledge, the Purushottama. What you would have got through bhakti, you here get through action. What you'd have got through knowledge, you get through action. So this is the emphasis, he says, in the Gita. Arjuna and Krishna, this human and this divine, stand together, not as seers in the peaceful hermitage of meditation, but as fighter and holder of the reins in the clamorous field, in the midst of the hurtling shafts, in the chariot of battle. You see how it denounces? He says, these are not people sitting in the peaceful hermitage of meditation. So it is not a colloquy, it is not a dialogue that's taking place between two persons sitting in a hermitage in a quiet corner of the forest or the mountain. Whereas this is right in the middle of the midst of the hurtling shafts in the chariot of battle. So we have emphasized this many a time, I won't repeat, that how Gita's relevance is because it is given in a chariot of battle, not in a meditation room or a hermitage. The teacher of the Gita is therefore not only the God in man who unveils himself in the world of knowledge, but the God in man who moves our whole world of action, by and for whom all our humanity exists and struggles and labors, towards whom all human life travels and progresses. He is the secret master of works and sacrifice and the friend of the human pupils. That comes to the end of this chapter 1. But you see, the last line is in fact the summary and at the same time the link to the next chapter, chapter 3. What does it say here? The teacher of the Gita is therefore not only the God in man who unveils himself in the world of knowledge. So there is one is the God in man is the indwelling deity, the immanent divine Sri Krishna. He is that. At the same time, he is the one who unveils himself in the world of knowledge. But the God in man who moves our whole world of action. So he is also the cosmic universal man and the deity or the God who moves from outside also. That is the beauty of this Indian spirituality, that the divine moves you from within and the divine moves you from without. So we are kind of, enveloped by the divine, within and without. And even in a mundane, normal life we will see down the line, when you look back into your life, you will see his outstretched hand at every moment of our trouble. At that moment, maybe you do not realize it. We say it's a sorrow that has come into my life, it is a great catastrophe in my life. But then down the line, you will thank God that this has happened to you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here at this spot. So, lastly, I would say, this is the deity by and for whom all our humanity exists and struggles and labors. So, we also really, knowingly or unknowingly, we all struggle because we struggle unconsciously or consciously because, as Sri Aurobindo would tell us, this whole Prakriti or nature is moving towards that Purusha, towards fulfilling the divine. Because Prakriti, what we say, nature, has no other business than to fulfill the Purusha's desire, the wish. So it takes its own modalities, it takes its own time, but its whole aim is to fulfill the divine. Or as we get many a line in Savitri, it is there to manifest the divine. So it is in that larger sense we see that it's towards whom all life travels and progresses. The last line, he is the secret master of works and sacrifice and the friend of the human peoples. So this last word about the friend is what is the last aspect that we did not take up till now. The divine as the friend. And that is the most prominent thing that we will see with a human disciple. So, who is this person? He is the divine friend. And the mother also would tell us, if we take the divine as your friend, that is the best relation we can have. Because the divine alone is the best friend.